While we are, and our parliamentarians are, consumed with the question of how Brexit is supposed to make Britain great again, austerity has been all but forgotten. Even though for most people, cuts to public services, local government and welfare have a far greater impact on their daily lives than the details of a negotiation with Brussels. The facts are stark. Support workers say the closure of youth centres and cuts to policing are linked to the rise in violent crime. The lack of public housing has led to a crisis of homelessness. The poorest families with children, many of them working, have been sinking deeper into poverty. So when the government says these cuts are necessary to balance the books, make no mistake as to who is paying the price. And when the government says Brexit is about what kind of country we want to live in, I fear we already have the answer.
So what are you asking for?
I would like us to pay more attention to what's already happening in the country, that our parliament already has total sovereignty over, which is austerity that is continuing to harm people, and I'd like it to change. I would like an end to austerity, and I would like us to start investing in our services again, in investment that could actually help create employment, that would encourage private sector investment, and that would help grow the economy, because, frankly, austerity has failed.
Do you think so? See, I think... I agree with you that Brexit has become very all-consuming, and as you just heard me say a moment ago, I think that a huge part of that was because we were so underprepared for the eventuality of Brexit that we've been running around chasing our tails ever since. So
I agree with you about that.
Yeah, so I share your concerns. I also share your concerns about things like the cutting of youth centres and things like that, because I think that those decisions were very ill thought out. When I look at austerity and where cuts have been made and where spending has been protected, I get very frustrated, for example, at things like the foreign aid spending, which has been protected in the face of the things that you've just been talking about, so police officers, etc., being cut. I think that was a very wrong decision, that if we were going to have austerity and it to be affecting people's everyday life, that things like international development were protected from that. So I would like to see the international development, that protection removed. And I would actually like to see some thought going into how are we going to protect things like, or recreate things like the youth centres and the youth services, etc., because I do agree with you that they are failing. But what I do think about austerity is that it has been very necessary, because it's just basic common sense that you cannot have a country which continues spending way, way more than it's making. That's just not common sense.
But Michelle, economists call this zombie economics, because they're ideas that have been tried out over and over again and they've never worked, and that yet they keep getting resurrected, you know. And the evidence is that having debt and having deficit spending, it does not necessarily harm economic growth. That's the evidence. And I just want to, can I just, before you come in, Majid, show you some statistics, because this is what we're talking about. And I think we kind of agree, Michelle. I mean, international development spending and aid is another topic, and we don't agree about that. But just to look at this is food bank usage. It's gone up 418% since 2012. And this is homelessness. Homelessness has gone up 169%. And I sometimes wonder how it is that we have all decided to be content to live in a society where the poorest are suffering so much.
So I want to agree with this point, Afua, that you've raised, and thank you for raising it. I think austerity's gone too far, and I also endorse what you just said there about economics. I think the Keynesian model versus the classical model of economics, the jury is out, and that's why I'm not an ideologue. If we have growth through investment funding, through the state investing in our infrastructure, that can also raise tax revenue and raise more for the Treasury as well. I mean, we all remember the Treasury Secretary who said there's no more money left. When the coalition government came in, I supported what I believed was an emergency austerity that was needed. I think now, as well as the majority of the British public, I think I'm with them, that it's gone too far. And all we need to do is just take a cursory glance at our country. Look at the rising homelessness that you mentioned. Look at the rise and spike in violent crime across the country. Look at the NHS and how it's creaking at the seams. But most worrying of all for me, because it's something I care passionately about, is look at the state of our mental health services and the rising suicide rates of young men. The biggest killer of young men in this country isn't gang crime, isn't terrorism.
But is that related to austerity?
Well, it's related to, I believe, and of course it's up for debate, a lack of care for mental health and a lack of parity of esteem and funding for mental health and social care, right? And unless we put the funding where it's needed, we're going to witness something tragic, and that is our young men continuing to kill themselves. There is no way around that. It requires money. And then finally look at prisons and the state of our prisons and crime and drug-ridden prisons that we have. We've got to move on before, I know Nick wants to come in, but let's just look at the public's view on this. And the stats regarding this, 66%, I think, of the public believe that cuts have gone too far. Of course, 9% say not far enough, and 18% say about right.
Just need to say that Theresa May has said more money will be spent on the provision of mental health care. And I don't know that we should base everything necessarily on people using food banks, but as we started this edition of The Pledge by me explaining to you that I am far brighter than the rest of you, I'm going to give you first a history lesson
and then a maths
lesson.
By your repeated slamming of the table.
And then a maths lesson. So I wonder if we can go back to November 2015 and hear from George Osborne.
If our country doesn't bring the deficit down, the deficit could bring our country down again. And that's why, for the economic security of every family in Britain, we must hold our nerve.
That was the then Chancellor. History lesson over. Now, class, pick up your pencils for the math lesson, and let's look at some charts. Over the last 8 years, the government have reduced that deficit by £109 billion from nearly £150 billion to just under £40 billion over the same period. Unemployment has fallen from 7.9% to 4.4%. It's now at record lows. And the number of people living in households where all members had never worked now stands at 513,000. And hold on, and in a report this week we learnt that since the B-Day, not B-Day in that sense, since Brexit Day, around 1,000 people have found work every single day.
And how's economic growth?
So what I would say to that, if you look at how the debt has been tackled, if you look at the creation of jobs, if you don't have it that way, Afua, how would you do it?
Real wage growth as well.
How would you do it?
We are not seeing, and that sounds great. Yeah. Why are we not better off?
Imagine if you're one of those people watching now who's found employment, who's one of those 1,000 people every day. It doesn't sound great, Afua. It's bloody great.
So how come a record number of working families are now living in poverty?
So how would you do it?
So that's my point, that being in employment is now not taking people out of poverty. We need wage increases. We need wage increase in the public sector. We need private sector growth. We need stable jobs, not 0 hours contracts.
She's right.
And
gig economy.
And we need GDP growth. We need higher tax revenue so that we can get our public spending back to a sustainable level. So we can provide essential public services. Just look at the images of litter. I'm not even talking about youth services, mental health.
Because
local authorities cannot collect.
Afua, can I just say, to translate that maths lesson, thank you.
That's my pleasure.
For me,
I'll do physics later if you ask nicely.
Is that though unemployment is falling, of course, wages have stagnated and the cost of living has gone up, and of course that I don't only need to mention the prices of property and rent has gone up as a result. So that doesn't give us the full picture. I think the country is still going through a bit of a depressed stage. If you look at the state of homelessness as a symbol of that, it just symbolises where we are at the moment.
Afua, what we saw from that graph was as you bring down the debt, you are cutting essential services, and that is the inevitable trade-off. Well, no, it is. I mean, we'll look at what councils' budgets have been slashed in half, and let's see what the Home Office has said. They're actually saying that they are trying to keep a basic minimum of service. The government has provided a strong and comprehensive settlement that is increasing. This is policing funding. Our new serious violence strategy will put a stronger focus on steering young people away from violence while continuing to ensure the strongest possible law enforcement response. Here's homelessness. No one should have to ever sleep rough on our streets, and we are determined to halve the numbers by 2022 and eradicate it by 2027. So they recognise there's a problem. They recognise that austerity has led to sort of social, lack of...
No, the point that Michelle made.
I can't even think of the word. What's it led to?
I'll help you.
Help me.
That's what I'm here for, because it's proven that I'm right. Michelle is right. Why are we finding £14 billion for overseas aid? Why are we buying £60 billion for a railway line? For a railway line, for £60 billion for a railway line, nobody wants.
When's HS2
£1 billion to prop up the government with a deal with the DUP. We've got money when we want it. Every time.
Isn't that her argument?
A billion is
you're making her case for her.
Change.
Really? Try telling that to the people out there on these food banks that she's just been banging on about. Might be loose change to the Johnsons. It's real money out there, I'll tell you.
Theresa May needed to stay in power.
She shook her magic money tree, didn't she?
Yeah, when it's there, it's always there.